Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Nap Chats. I'm Caleb, this is Johannah, and we're talking about things that come up in life and how the Bible relates to those things to give you some context in a way that a sermon can't really do on Sunday. So we're thankful for all of you who watch. If you do have questions or comments on what we say, please include them in the comments section. We'd be glad to hear what you're thinking. Johannah, what are we going to talk about today?
We're talking about men and women, so...
That's good that you indicated with your hand.
Well... So it's not going to be about what is a man and what is a woman and gender. I identify that. I wasn't going to get into that.
Sure. I got this great idea for a thing where I go around and interview people and ask them a question. What is a woman? I think it'll be big. Just kidding.
I feel like every person on YouTube is now talking about reviewing what is a woman, and then they've got a hot take.
I just think I'm gonna do a show just reviewing something also that is just so very obvious, and see if I can get as big as Matt Walsh. What is a wall? What is a wall?
You'll get big. All right. So, but this isn't about that. It's not about what is a man or what is a woman. I'm talking about
what is a spork. Okay. Sorry, I can't be stopped.
It's fun to interview you during the day rather than at night. You're a little more bouncy. So what I wanted to talk about is is talking about what men and women do in the church. Is that relevant anymore? I feel like it's so 2013. Back in the day, it's what can women do? And women can do these things in the church, and let's reevaluate the role. Is talking about men and women still a relevant topic, or is it just it's important to talk about what is a woman?
Yeah, I think the struggle is it's forgetting what the battle actually is right now. So maybe a generation ago, when everyone was agreed upon what a woman and what a man was, the discussion about the roles of men and women in the church and what was acceptable for men and women to do in the church was a more poignant discussion. Mm-hmm. But I think now we have to fight a different battle, which is to just help men and women understand what it means to be men and women in general, right? And I'm not talking about gender transition and gender identity and those sorts of things. That, of course, is a fight worth having, but at least as it relates to a church where we agree that God has created the male and female, I think we have to press harder, not on what are the exact roles in the church, but is there a fundamental difference, right, between men and women? Even though we would say, of course there are men and of course there are women, what actually distinguishes those things from a Christian worldview?
Okay,
right?
So we need to be talking, if I'm clear, we need to be talking about what things are true of all women and what things are true of all men.
Right.
Because I think that's such a hard thing, because not all women love cleaning the house. Not all women are emotional thinkers, or I don't know, whatever the thing may be. Not all men love to body build. We've got these, that's not true. But you're saying we still need to discuss, God did, He make you different, and it isn't just. I don't want to say the word online. It isn't just your parts.
Yeah, right. I think asking the question, what is a woman or what is a man, not from a gender standpoint, but from a how does God create humanity? What is the purpose of creating humanity in two sexes? What is He communicating to us about Himself and about us and about the essential qualities of who we are?
Okay.
Before we ever get to what does this look like,
right,
as it manifests itself in the church or in the home or in society? Because
it is more than physical. It's not just that men are generally stronger and bigger and women are just smaller. Though that's got to connect to it, because while men are bigger and stronger, God didn't just randomly, there's a different word I wanted, but I was going to say obtrusely.
I don't think obtrusely is a word.
God didn't just say, I'm going to make men big and women small. That's just the lot of it. There was a purpose in the way He built us that also fit our roles. And women are probably generally smaller for a different reason. And we also are childbearing bodies. There's just differences physically, but it's got to also connect to who we are mentally, emotionally, or how He designed us. So can you get into what do you think is different other than
physical?
Well,
I think that's part of the discussion, right? Is because these things are not as black and white as your body parts, right? That's very obvious for the vast majority of people, whether you are a man or a woman. But all the other things, such as how does your personality manifest itself, or how tall are you, or how muscular are you, well, there's, of course, generalities to these things. To what extent are these things essential? To what extent do these things necessitate a certain set of behaviors, right? Like you were kind of saying, well, if I have a womb, therefore I must bear children. Is that a logical conclusion that we can take, for example? Or because men are generally physically stronger, does that mean they are supposed to, maybe the conclusion someone would make is they're the ones who are supposed to go out of the home to work in the workplace because of their physical capabilities. Right. So like the question is, how do these things all relate to our exact essence as men and women? Okay. Before we even talk about specific things.
So like, do we draw conclusions from these things? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what we have to, what I'm trying to press on people is we have grown up, at least my generation has grown up in a society where we have been told you can be whatever you want. And I think the people who were saying that originally didn't expect that the end result of telling people they could be whatever they want would be people transitioning their sex. Mm-hmm. But that is what has happened. Now, thankfully, in much of the Christian church, that is not the case, right? But there is an attitude that is still behind the general ethos of society, even within the Christian church, that it doesn't much matter who I am. I can do or be whatever I want to be. And traditional societies don't struggle with this because they have roles that are already assigned to the genders.
Right.
Now, again, we could say those things are right or wrong, but what I want us to ask ourselves is, do we fundamentally believe ourselves to be men, and that requires a certain set of behaviors or attitudes, or women, and that set requires a certain set of behaviors or attitudes?
That's really philosophical. But, so, I mean, just, can I tangent on the, like, you can be yourself thing? Like, I mean, there's obviously, like, the really, like, extreme version of, like, oh, you can choose what gender you want to be, but, like, I feel like the little ones can be just as destructive of, like, you can be whatever you want to be. So therefore my life is focused on me achieving this whatever, which can change. Like one time I want to be an actress, and then later I want to be an Olympian, and then you just never figure it out. And then are you searching for happiness? Are you searching for fulfillment? What are you searching for? And then you get to your like 50 and you're like, what was I? I don't actually know what I was. I don't like when people tell me to be myself, because honestly I don't know who I am, because it changes. And so that's really stressful to me. Like, just be yourself. A lot of days I'm grumpy and want to lay on the couch. Is that what I'm supposed to be?
Yeah. If I was myself, that'd be bad news. Right. So I bring this up a lot because I think it's so pertinent and it's so unknown in Christianity. But one of the most ancient heresies against the Christian church is Gnosticism. And Gnosticism was this idea that the body was this external shell for the real inner self, the real inner person, right? And how often we see that continue to manifest itself in life today. Now, for them, their idea was the body is evil and the soul is good, right? Our manifestation of it is the soul is who I really am, and my body is auxiliary or accidental to that, using the philosophical way of understanding accidental. So when we look at ourselves, what we very often consider to be our true self is a certain subset of our desires or abilities, rather than what is physically true, ontologically true, like unchangeable, right?
But it's both, right? No.
Well, I think that's the question. And what the Bible would take us from is not my inner desires influence how my external behavior happens, but like in a sense of vocation or gender, but that my body determines, therefore, what I should pursue, right? What I should have as my preference or my desires.
Right. We'll pause this and get right back to it after our daughter's done screaming.
So what I think we necessarily have to do is ask ourselves what is essential to masculinity from a biblical point of view, and what is essential to femininity from a biblical point of view, before we even have a discussion about what men or women can or cannot do, or their roles in marriage or the church. Because I don't think we approach it from that point of view. We don't approach it, at least people I've had this discussion with don't approach it from who am I, therefore what should I do? They approach it from what do I want to do? Can I do that?
Yeah.
Right.
So
Which is
reverse.
the opposite way of approaching it.
Well, and I also think it's just looking at all of like God's laws as though they're just like arbitrary. That's the word I was looking for before. Arbitrary. Like God just put up these things of this is what men and women can and cannot do, and that's what I said. And like God's wisdom is unsearchable, so we're attempting to kind of search it here, but it's still like we're never going to really understand why. But of course, he's not just saying that just because. Like God's design for how men and women should act in the church, that all comes from a place of I designed you this way, it was purposeful, and it's going to look beautiful if done. So it's not arbitrary how I'm telling you how to behave.
Right.
It comes from how I designed you, your body, your mind, as a woman, as a man, and it's going to look beautiful when married together.
Right. I think most people approach Christianity as if the human being is malleable. The human being is a blank slate in a sense, and you are imposing like a program on the person, sort of like you would install a program on your computer.
Yeah.
The software, the program, is the Christian ethos, and you install that on a human being, which therefore you can ask yourself, okay, like you do when you install a program, do you want to install this portion of it or this portion of it, or do you want to do the automatic recommended installation? Maybe that is lost on those of you who don't do a lot with computers. But that's not fundamentally what is true, right? What is true is God designed us a certain way, and we are a corrupt version of that because of our sin. So what God is actually giving us is not software. He's giving us hardware. He's saying fundamentally you have these components. So hardware is like you have a hard drive and a processor.
Just don't try.
You have hardware. You have immutable things, right? A computer has.
You keep using big words. This isn't helping you. Immutable. Okay.
Unchangeable things that no program can change, right?
Sure,
if your computer has a certain video card, it doesn't matter what kind of program you put in, it just only has got the capabilities of that video card. So we are a computer in the sense of like, we have been created with certain capabilities, and we are now trying to do something else. We're a computer trying to be a speedboat or something. Computer trying to be a blender. I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's the difference, right? We can't look at these things and say, oh, they're arbitrary. They're just like kind of what God prefers because of some
archaic
preference. Preference that he has.
Yeah.
No, these are fundamental truisms about our reality.
All right, Matt Walsh, so what is a woman?
I noticed I was also doing this hand motion a lot. I don't know who that's from. Maybe it's from me. The first thing to note about the way that God describes the roles of men and women is he grounds it in the family, right? The very first thing he does when he creates man and woman, the way he distinguishes them from each other to each other, right? So he says, how are these two things different, separate? He says, Adam, this is part of you, and yet it is different from you, but it is necessary for you.
Okay.
Right? That's how Eve is created. Adam falls asleep, God takes a rib, fashions Eve out of the rib. He says, now, this is for you, it is different from you, but necessary for you. And Adam says, then this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. So the primary distinguishing characteristic of men and women to each other is that they fundamentally need each other in a familial way. Right?
Okay.
Now that doesn't necessitate marriage and sexual intimacy, because when God says it's not good for the man to be alone, I don't think he is necessarily talking about marriage. He's just saying like human men by themselves are bad without human women, and vice versa. So I'm saying that in a familial context, like not just our husband and wives good for each other, but brothers and sisters are good for each other, and so on from there.
Well, and even, I mean, I guess I always took that to mean like brothers with brothers are good for each other, like, but that can only happen if you procreate. Like, so the procreation and the growth of our race, like that's good, generally.
So a foundational reality of who men and women are is that they are familial partners.
Okay.
Right? They have to exist in a family together.
Okay.
Luther brings this out really well when he says that there are three estates that human beings exist in: the family, the church, and the state or the government. And that every one of them derives their authority from the family structure. The family is foundational to that, because what is a church? Well, a church is a family of families, right? And what is the government? Or the state? It is a family of families, right? With a head, a person who is on top, who is supposed to be serving his people for the good of all of their life, just as a father does for his family. So that is all to say, fundamentally, a man is a father.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And fundamentally, a woman is a mother.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we import a whole bunch of like scientific realities into that, right? We think about sex, and we think about procreation, right? And we think about marriage.
Mm-hmm.
It is broader than that, right? Because God calls himself a father, and yet he does not procreate. He is not married,
Yeah.
right? So father is not a role that is necessitated by or given by by procreation.
Right. It's like a mindset.
It is a attitude that you have towards other people.
Well, and a pastor is called the father of the church too. So like, well, you didn't birth everyone in our church. So like,
right.
Well, you're a man. Never mind. I didn't.
Well, what is a man?
But just the father, it's like a mindset and an attitude and a way of acting.
It's a responsibility.
Okay.
Right? It's a responsibility. Again, God the Father being our example of this. What does God the Father do? God the Father is the one who puts together the divine plan of salvation by which he uses the abilities of the people under his care, namely the Son and the Holy Spirit, in order to accomplish the good of all the rest of his children. Right? So the Father's attitude is to use the resources at his disposal in order to protect and, if necessary, save the people under his care.
So you're getting to my next question, which is, what is a father? We're just going with these questions. What is a father? Mm-hmm. Like, how would you describe father, which is protecting, saving? I don't know. Do you have more to say to that? So like a man in his, like the way that God designed men is to have this father mindset, this father behavior, this father responsibility, and it's protecting, saving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's pretty much it, right? And so not only can men with children do that, with biological children, of course that can happen with adoptive children, but it can happen through mentorship, right? From older men to younger men. It can happen even from younger men as they think about their role in a community, whether it's a church or a neighborhood or something like this, that their role for society, whether it's a community of church or otherwise, is to be the protector and servant of that community for the sake of its good. Well, and that's going to look different in different contexts.
Right, and I think that just broadens our responsibility. Like the world is crazy right now. It's just nuts. And so if you say you are a father, and not just of your people right here, you need to have the father protective mindset of everyone. Well, that is totally different than what we were talking about before, which is like, just be yourself. Like that's just it. Those can't even really exist together, those two mindsets, very well. I mean, I suppose each person is going to use their gifts and abilities to father and to protect in different ways. And so one person might be doing that in a very bold, I'm going to be on the front lines kind of thing, and another one will do it in a more quiet and listening sort of way. And both are beautiful, but they still have that same purpose.
Right. How you exactly act out this role is negotiable. So, for example, I'm writing a Bible study right now on men and women, which is partly why we're talking about this. But in there, I have an agree-disagree question of, can a husband be properly accomplishing his role if he delegates all responsibility to his wife? Well, in a sense, yes. That's a ridiculous example, but it's for the sake of illustrating that you can, as a father, say, the way that I am going to care for my household is by giving all things to my wife to care for. Maybe it's because she's just this ridiculously, miraculously capable human being who can do all things in a household and doesn't need any help. Of course, that's ridiculous. It's not going to happen. And it's not wise because there are definitely things that just naturally men generally do better.
Right.
But
or
the point
each
of the
person.
But the point of the illustration is to say, you don't even have to do anything. You just have to be responsible for the doing of things.
Right.
That's the fatherly role, to say, this is where we are going. I don't have to accomplish any of it. It can all be delegated to everyone else. But I'm the one who ultimately says, here is the best way to protect and provide and serve the people under my care.
So it's so interesting because like it's really common now to just like for men to just say, I let my wife decide those things. I let her figure it out. And I think that, well, that can be a really beautiful thing. Like she's really gifted at this. She's really good at this. But I think sometimes what they're doing, instead of delegating it to their wife, is they're trying to take the blame and the push and the responsibility and put it on their wife. And I think that's where it's ugly, because it's totally fine to let your wife deal with these things and stuff. But if she falls, rather than saying like, why did you fall? Why did you not do this right, or organize this right, or figure this out right? Instead, like the blame is still ultimately on the man, or should be on the man's shoulders. And like, even if the wife did it wrong, well, I should have delegated it to you, or I didn't help you enough, or I didn't, whatever. Like, why did I do that? And that's more of the attitude of the father.
Right.
Yes?
So there's a difference between delegation and abdication of the responsibility. And delegation is a fine thing. Abdication is not. So one guy that I listen to, I really respect, he makes this distinction between fathers and managers. And he says a manager and a father have the same essential role. They are over somebody else for the sake of the good of a larger group. But a manager is going to do that, first of all, without taking much responsibility of the failures or successes. Or failures, usually he takes some responsibility for the successes, but doesn't take responsibility for the failures of those underneath him.
Yeah, he fires them.
Right. While a father will take responsibility for the failures of those underneath him. If his child breaks a window, the father pays for it, right, is the example. So we have to ask ourselves, are we managers, men? Are we managers or are we fathers? Are we doing this for the sake of the good of those underneath us, and we are absorbing all of the failure that they may produce, saying either, I didn't give you the right resources, I didn't give you the right support, I didn't whatever, or are we saying to them, this is your fault, your problem? That's a managerial role.
Sure.
And the question then for us to ask ourselves, which is even scarier, is, are our pastors acting like fathers or managers? And is our government acting like fathers or managers, right? And if they aren't acting like fathers, that's actually probably more of a result that the families that are underneath them do not have fathers acting like fathers. It's so easy for us to say, well, those terrible politicians, they don't care about us. Well, where do you think they came from?
Right.
They came from a society of managers who are over their families, not fathers.
Just the idea of families being building blocks for the society. If your families start to collapse, like, what is your government made of other than just corrupted families? And that's really sad, because we've got so many kids just growing up in broken homes, and like, no wonder why they're having all these mental issues and have these skewed moral views of like, well, it's okay to just lie to people about this. It's for this, whatever the thing may be. They don't come from a good family.
Well, who votes for a manager to be in office? Someone who perceives, because of their personal experience, the managerial role as the fatherly role.
Yeah.
Right? That's what they know as fatherhood. And so they try to put a person in the fatherhood role in government who fits what they are used to, which is often managerial.
Sure. Should we talk about women a little bit?
Sure. So compare father to mother. Now, again, we can easily go with father, God the Father, as the example of what fatherhood is. We can't obviously as easily go that way with motherhood. But we do get a little glimpse into it through the person of Jesus Christ, right? Because Jesus not only describes himself as a mother in a couple different places, like a mother hen who wants to gather his chicks under her wings.
Interesting.
But he also describes his submission to God the Father as the same type of submission that a wife has for her husband.
Okay.
Right. So there's a little bit that we can get in that. Well, what is Jesus' role?
No one wants to be Jesus. His life is just tough.
Right. Well, Jesus is the one who accomplishes a whole lot of work for the Trinity, right? He is the one who accomplishes the plan of salvation through his submission to the Father. And therefore, the motherly role is one of, if you will, going and being with the people for the sake of actually doing the saving that has been proclaimed by the Father.
Okay,
right?
I don't think I understand that.
So the Father, God the Father, proclaims this plan of salvation. Jesus is the one who goes and accomplishes it. Now, again, we talked about delegation and how that can all work. Could God the Father have done it himself? Sure, but he chooses to do it through the person of Jesus, right? So he, in a sense, delegates that role to Jesus. Well, what was Jesus' role then? To go and actually be with the people in order to save them, to give his life for them.
I don't get how that connects to women, though.
So what is the role of women? The role of women is to give their life for the sake of other people. Now, that probably most obviously happens through childbirth, right? You're literally letting life out of your body in order to create life in another human being. But it is probably more broad than that, in that mothers are often the ones who are literally giving up time in their life that they could otherwise use to do other things for the sake of the life of other people, most obviously children, but that can get broader even to the community and to their church and so on. The role of mother is one of sacrificing life for the sake of giving life.
I'm sorry, I don't think I understand how you get the jump from just because Jesus describes himself as a mother and submissive to the Father. I don't get how that means. So therefore, that's what women are. Like that seems like a really big jump to say that we do the same thing. Mm-hmm. Just because there's like a couple things that sort of make it seem similar. Like therefore, we need to do that role. And I'm not saying that what you're saying is wrong or bad. I just don't understand the connection, nor putting that on like now women have to be this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the places to go in Scripture for this are places like 1 Corinthians. Adam was created first, and then Eve, and therefore women work out the role of being the submissive but helpful helper, which of course is not an inferiority thing. It is actually a complementary thing.
Right. I like the word complement. I think that works better on our Western ears.
Right. That it is a necessary and interdependent part of the relationship of human beings. You can also go to 1 Timothy 2, where it talks about women are saved through their childbearing.
Yeah.
Right. And that doesn't mean that in order to be saved they need to have children, but that part of the womanly responsibility is bringing life into the world through childbearing. And again, we are taking a microcosmic picture and we're expanding it. So you may not agree with all of my applications of this, but what I will say is it is very obvious God has made women with the physical capabilities of giving their life for the sake of giving life. Mm-hmm. That most easily makes us think of Jesus, who also describes himself in the same terms as God describes woman to man.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think if you also just come at your life and just look at your life as a whole and say, God has been gracious to me, saved me, loved me. Like, how can I give of myself just as much as possible? And like, if I just try and figure that out on my own, like, oh, maybe I just need to set up a bunch of auctions and raise a bunch of money and give it to the church. That's the thing, like, well, that's just something I contrived on my own. Like, that's probably not that great of an idea compared to like, what did God make me to be? Let me search it out. Let me see, what does Scripture say about me? What does my body say about me, my mind, everything? Like, how do I put that all together and say, with this whole package of information, I can then live out the life with wisdom, and it will not be perfect ever, but like then I kind of know this is more part of God's creation, and then maybe I'm walking in a path that's clear. Like, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light for my path. Like, in the word, there are things for us to do. And so I think it's like, if you're coming at it from that attitude, all of those things that you're saying are not offensive at all. Mm-hmm. But I think that it become very much offensive if you're like, but I don't want to do that. Well, if we have the heart that just wants to do what God, to serving God as best as possible, then it makes it a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. I would say Jesus didn't want to do it either, right? He's praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. If it's possible for me to not do this, I would rather not, right? Mm-hmm. He doesn't want to give up his life because he realizes the consequences of that. Mm-hmm. And I would also say, let's remember, Jesus is not submissive in any sort of like dictatorial following of the Father, right? There's a very close relationship. I and the Father are one. He prays to God the Father, which of course women don't have to pray to men, but they can communicate with them and talk to them about what is going on and what their preferences are. And men therefore have the responsibility as father to say, if it is at all possible for me to provide this good thing for these people who desire this good thing, I will do it as long as it doesn't hurt them or somebody else. Right? And that's an attitude that you can take from fatherhood, husbandry, and say, my responsibility is to give as much good as I possibly can to my children and my wife, insofar as it does not hurt them or somebody else, even at my own expense.
Right. I also think with women, like the idea of being complimentary first to God and then to our husbands, that makes it easier too. Like, well, regardless of what I think of what my husband says, like I am first complimentary, listening, obeying God, which my husband has to do too, or the other men in our church or whatever, other people in my life. I actually love the role of women. I'm thankful I don't have the responsibility. I know other women feel differently about that. For me, it's just, it feels more in line with just the way that I'm designed, with the way that I'm wired. Like I'd rather just be on the side and help you out however I can. Like, but I don't think all women feel that way. So I think that's challenging. I don't know if you have anything to say to that.
No, not being a woman, I obviously don't know experientially, but I have at least enough empathy to say that I don't think it is easy, and I don't think men have made it particularly easy. Right? That abdication of responsibility has put an undue pressure on women to accomplish a whole bunch of things that they were never supposed to have to accomplish. And along with that pressure to accomplish those things, the responsibility for the failure to not accomplish those things, which is a double whammy, right?
Yeah. Women feel like they're failing at everything right now because they're trying to hold down a job and raise children, and they're failing at both. And like, I'm sorry, like that's not the way it's meant to be.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So to the extent to which men can take on that father role, even if they're not married or have children, and to the extent to which women can trust that God, their father, is going to be faithful in protecting them and providing for them as a perfect father, even in the presence of men who are imperfect, and therefore trying to live out their role, we will solve a whole lot of problems when it comes to what exactly does a man or woman do in their marriage, or what exactly does a man or woman do in their church.
Okay. I have one last question,
Sure.
if that's all right. We got to keep it brief because I need to go get Irene. But is this too radical of a thought? Like when we raise our children, I think we just like raise them, you know, and it's good to have something we're raising them to be. And again, it's really easy in society, like, oh, raise your kid to be whatever they want to be. Well, okay, what if they want to be like a circus performer, and like, all right, like I'm going to just let them do circus performing things all of their childhood, and then what if like there's no job in that, you know, and they can't actually get a circus performing job or whatever, you know, like it's just like it can be ridiculous. Maybe it can be something good to explore and enjoy a bit, but like, am I going to put our energy towards that one specific thing? So the reason whatever they want to be seems not that healthy. Is it the idea of raising kids to be moms and to be dads? Is that just too radical? Like it sounds so old-fashioned. Like I'm going to raise my little daughter to be a good housewife and a mother. Like, yeah, it sounds funny, but I don't know. Hearing all of this, I'm like, well, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it would just be a matter of making sure you don't get too specific on your exact principles of what motherhood or fatherhood exactly look like, right? Okay. So it's not teaching them to be a mother to teach them to bake sourdough bread, right? As if that's some sort of stereotype.
Right? I do want to raise my children.
I want to know how to bake sourdough bread, but thankfully I have a wife who does. But like that sort of stuff where you can't say, okay, well, what being a wife means is you are there for, you know, let's learn all the stay-at-home mom, housekeeper things.
Sure.
Although those things might be valuable, and they'll be valuable for your sons as well. Let's not just say that's what constitutes motherhood. Right. What constitutes motherhood is that self-sacrificial attitude. And what constitutes fatherhood is that responsible leadership, selfless leadership. So those are the things to engender in your children, and let those things manifest themselves however they want. I think, so Tim Keller's kind of 3-step process for figuring out what you should do with your life, or what you should do in your church, or what you should do really in any situation is really helpful for me, and it's really easy to remember because it's assonance. So assonance is where you repeat vowels, but it's opportunity, ability, and affinity. Right? So what are the opportunities? What are the needs in your community, whether your community is your family or your church or your neighborhood or your country? What are your abilities? So after evaluating what are the opportunities, which of those opportunities do I have the ability to do? And assuming there are multiple options, then which of them do I prefer? Yeah. But we usually go in the exact opposite direction and say, what do I want to do?
Circus performer.
Right. And then if I have the abilities or not, I'll figure that out. And then finally, once I've gone to 4 years of higher education to do that thing, I'll figure out whether there are job opportunities or not, which generally leads to some pretty negative outcomes, just as far as like actually getting a job or being really truly happy in that job. Yeah. So for your children, I would say let's ask them, what are the opportunities? What are the things that are needed in our community? Well, what are those things do you think you have the ability to do? Or are you starting to show the ability to do? And then we can ask, what do you like to do?
I love this topic. Can we do an episode on raising kids to be moms and dads, and just how you raise kids with a mindset towards something? Maybe there's.
I can't say I've done it successfully yet, but
okay, all right,
I can give you some thoughts.
Maybe that'll be our next one. Write in comments or questions if you have any in that area, or in any of this actually. I'd like to continue this conversation, but I need to go. So
thanks for watching. Thanks for taking the time. If you do have a comment, please leave it. We'd be glad to hear what you have to say. Look forward to catching you next time for another episode.